A few years ago, I was driving back west after attending my brother's wedding on the East Coast. It was a brutal trip, 5 full days on the road. To make it as short as possible, I drove until I physically couldn't anymore, then stopped wherever I could find a place to sleep. By the 4th day, I was exhausted, but still pushing through the night. The plan was simple: keep driving until I found a motel. It was around 10 p.m. when I hit a stretch of highway that felt completely abandoned. No other cars, no trucks, no lights, just miles of empty road cutting through nothing. That's when I started to get uneasy. My phone had lost service a while back, and I had no idea how far it was to the next town, gas station, or motel. Still, I had just downed a couple of energy drinks, so for the moment, I was wide awake and alert. For about 30 minutes, I didn't see a single vehicle. Then suddenly, in my headlights, I saw someone. It was a woman standing on the side of the road, waving both arms frantically like she needed help. She looked hunched over. Her clothes were dirty and disheveled, like she had crawled through the woods. Even from a distance, she looked injured, or at least desperate. I was going too fast to react properly, and by the time I registered what I was seeing, I had already blown right past her. At first, I kept driving, but the farther I went, the worse I felt. Out there, in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and no one else around, if she really was hurt, and I didn't help her, I'd basically be leaving her there to die. Now, for context, I had never picked up a hitchhiker in my life, and I definitely wouldn't have stopped for some random guy on a road like that. But this was a woman, and she looked hurt. I told myself I'd just pull up, ask if she was okay, and if anything felt off, I'd leave immediately and call the police as soon as I got service. So I turned around. When I got back to the spot where I'd seen her, she wasn't standing by the road anymore. She had moved closer to the tree line, but I could still see her there, still waving at me. I passed her, turned around again, and pulled right up to where she was standing. But when I stopped, she was gone. I sat there for nearly a full minute, engine running, headlights aimed at the shoulder of the road, waiting for her to step back out. Nothing. It was like she had vanished in the few seconds it took me to turn the car around. And then, against my better judgment, I got out. I left the car running and walked toward the shoulder, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Outside the car, it was dead silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. And beyond the reach of my headlights, the woods were pitch black. I could barely see 5 feet in. Then I saw something move. At first, it was just a shape shifting between the trees. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was her. She was much deeper in the woods now, way farther than I expected, and somehow, even from that distance, I could see her lifting her arms again, waving for help. Faintly, I could hear her voice too. It sounded weak, ragged, like someone who had been screaming for hours, maybe days. Dry, sick, desperate. And for some reason, I started walking toward her. Even now, I can't fully explain why. Every instinct was telling me something was wrong, but another part of me was completely convinced that this person needed help. I took a few more steps into the trees, then a few more. And then, all at once, the full weight of what I was doing hit me. It suddenly felt like I was being led away from my car, lured off the road, pulled deeper into the woods, one careful step at a time. That realization stopped me cold. The moment I stopped moving, she stopped too, her arms lowered. Her voice cut out instantly, not gradually, not naturally, just gone. We stood there in silence, staring at each other through the dark. And now that I was closer, I noticed something I hadn't before. Her proportions were wrong. She was tall, very tall, at least 6'2". That alone wouldn't have meant anything, but something about the way she stood felt unnatural, off. I couldn't tell if it was her posture, the length of her limbs, or the angle of her shoulders. It just didn't look right. Then she moved. She took one slow step toward me and tilted her head to the side. As her face slipped out of the shadow, I got a clearer look at it. And what I saw sent pure terror through me. I don't think it was a woman. The face looked strangely masculine. Not just masculine, but wrong in a way that's hard to explain. Uncanny, hollow, like something trying very hard to look human and almost succeeding. I turned and ran. I crashed through the trees back toward the road, and as I did, I heard that same weak, broken voice call out again behind me. "Help!" I threw myself into the car, slammed the door shut, and floored it. After that, I drove through the rest of the night without stopping once. I still don't know what I saw out there, but I know this. If I had followed it any deeper into those woods, I don't think I would have ever made it back. I was on a hunting trip, staying in a small backcountry shelter between excursions. Calling it a cabin would be generous. It was really just a wooden box in the middle of nowhere. 4 walls, a door, a single window, and 2 bunk beds. No electricity, no supplies, nothing else. I had all my camping gear with me, and when I was out hunting, I'd sleep in the forest. But the shelter was a little warmer than a tent, and a lot safer when I needed to rest and reset. The day after I arrived, I headed out on my first excursion and spent 2 nights in the woods. From the start, something felt off out there. It was too quiet. I didn't see animals. I barely saw tracks. The forest felt empty in a way that didn't feel normal. By the morning of the second night, I decided to head back to the shelter. When I got inside, I didn't notice it immediately, but after a few minutes, I became certain that someone had been there while I was gone. A few things had been moved. Nothing major, nothing stolen, just small items out of place. The kind of changes that only stand out if you know exactly how you left everything. At first, I wasn't too concerned. It was a public shelter. Anyone could have stopped there while I was away. Still, the place was so remote and looked so unused that it felt strange anyone else would even be out there. I made some lunch, unpacked, and rested for a few hours. Once the sun went down, I repacked my gear for the next morning and climbed into bed. There wasn't much else to do out there once it got dark. A few hours after sunset, I heard voices. 2 men. They were talking just outside the shelter, their voices getting closer. About 20 seconds later, the door opened. Even though I'd heard them coming, it still startled me. But what really bothered me was their reaction, or rather, their lack of one. They had to have known how remote this place was. There was no reason for them to expect someone else inside. And yet, when they saw me, neither of them looked even slightly surprised. One of them gave me a small nod as he walked in. That was it. I said, "Hey." Neither of them answered. They brought their things over to the other bunk bed, just a few feet away from mine. The shelter was tiny, With 3 grown men inside, it felt cramped immediately. Something about them felt wrong. I considered grabbing my bag and leaving right then, maybe hiking out a mile or so and setting up camp for the night. But that felt like an overreaction. These guys had probably hiked for miles to get there. Maybe they were just tired. Maybe they weren't talkative. And leaving alone in the middle of the night came with its own risks. So I stayed. I got back into bed. A minute later, one man climbed into the top bunk and the other lay down below him. Then the silence began. It wasn't normal silence. It was heavy, pressing, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every breath you take. I lay there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to relax, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. Then I turned my head and glanced at their bunk. One of the men was staring directly at me. Not casually, not because I had moved, just staring, like he had been watching me the whole time. I immediately turned my eyes back to the ceiling. My heart was pounding now. I was creeped out, but more than that, I was irritated. Why did these guys have to make this so weird? Why not just say hello like a normal person? Why come in, ignore me, and turn a shelter in the middle of nowhere into something that felt like a trap? For the next hour, I lay there wide awake, staring into the darkness, listening. The entire shelter remained perfectly still. I didn't hear either of them move once. No shifting, no turning over, nothing. Eventually, despite all of it, exhaustion won, and somehow I fell asleep. I don't know what woke me up, but the instant I opened my eyes, I knew it was still the middle of the night. The shelter was completely dark. For a few seconds, I couldn't see anything at all. Then slowly, shapes started to form. The ceiling above me, the faint outline of the room. And then I remembered the 2 men. I rolled over to look at their bunk. My heart nearly stopped. Both of them were standing in the middle of the shelter, motionless, facing me, watching me. Neither of them said a word. Neither of them moved. They just stood there in the dark, like mannequins, staring at me while I slept. I physically jolted backward, jumped out of bed, grabbed my bag and rifle, and ran for the door. They didn't try to stop me. They didn't say anything. They just watched. Adrenaline carried me through the woods for what had to be 4 miles before I finally stopped. I didn't even bother setting up a tent. I just sat against a tree with my rifle in my lap and waited for sunrise. The second it was light enough to see, I got the hell out of there. I still don't know what those men were doing or why they were standing over me like that in the middle of the night. But I honestly believe this. If I hadn't woken up when I did, I might never have woken up at all. Story 3. The Man with No Campsite. A couple times a year, I load a slide-in truck camper onto my pickup and head out for a few weeks of camping and traveling. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so there's no shortage of public land and remote places to stay for free. And honestly, that's the whole appeal. I like being alone out there. A lot of the easier spots are packed with RVs, camper vans, and people running generators or blasting music late into the night. I've always preferred the more isolated places, the ones most people don't bother with. This particular night, I found a secluded spot high up in the forests of East Idaho. Actually, I found it by accident. The first few campsites I checked were all taken, and by the time I reached this trail, it was already getting dark. I didn't explore very far. I saw the first open pull-off, parked, and decided that was good enough. The truck camper I had back then was one of those cheap pop-up models. Fine for sleeping, but miserable to spend real time inside. So whenever I camped, I lived outside as much as possible. Table, chair, fire, lanterns, the whole setup. That night, even though I arrived late, I still did exactly that. I switched on the bright exterior lights mounted to the side of the camper, set up my chair and table, started a fire, and cracked open a beer. I had only been sitting there for maybe an hour when I heard footsteps. A man emerged from the darkness and walked straight into my campsite. I had heard him a second before I saw him, so he didn't totally catch me off guard, but I was definitely surprised. Out there, in a place that remote, you don't expect random company. He gave me a wave and asked how my night was going. He looked normal enough, probably in his 30s, wearing a brown jacket, outdoorsy, average in every way. The kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about if you passed him in a gas station or trailhead. We started talking. I even gave him one of my beers, but the whole time, one thing felt strange. He never really explained why he had come over in the first place. After maybe 30 minutes, he said goodnight and walked back the way he came. I figured he must have been camped nearby and had seen my fire. Maybe he just wanted to know who his neighbor was for the night. A little odd, sure, but not that weird. Later, when it got much colder, I left my setup outside and climbed into the camper to sleep. The next morning, I got up early, made breakfast, and decided to walk farther down the trail to see where the guy had been camping. The sun was just coming up. It was cold, hazy, and dead quiet. I walked maybe a minute past my spot and stopped. There was a small turnaround area where vehicles had clearly reversed direction before. And that was it. No other campsites. No branch roads, no pull-offs, no way for a truck to go any farther. Past that point, the trail ended in dense forest so thick you couldn't have driven through it if you tried. Thinking maybe I'd missed something, I checked more carefully. I walked back in the other direction too. Nothing. My campsite had been the only one. So where the hell had that guy come from? While we had been talking the night before, he had casually mentioned that he was camping nearby in a small truck similar to mine. But there was nowhere he could have been parked. Nowhere at all. I went back to camp unsettled, but not panicked. I made coffee and kept an eye out, half expecting him to reappear or drive past. Hours went by. Nothing. As the day wore on, I started convincing myself there had to be some simple explanation. Maybe he'd parked farther away and walked in. Maybe he'd left in the middle of the night. Maybe I was overthinking it. By afternoon, it felt more like a weird mystery than a real threat, so I relaxed. I cooked dinner over the fire, watched the sunset through the trees, and enjoyed the kind of silence you only get in places that are truly remote. I stayed outside later than I normally would, and then, sometime after dark, I heard footsteps again. They were coming through the trees. A second later, the same man stepped into the light of my campsite. Before I could even say anything, he sat down across from me and asked, casually, "How's your night going?" For a second, I just stared at him. Then I played along. After a little small talk, I tried to ask as casually as I could where he was camped again. He pointed back down the trail. "My truck's just over there." He pointed toward the exact stretch of trail I had walked that morning, the stretch where I knew for a fact there was nothing. I gave a short fake laugh and said, "That's weird. I walked down there this morning and didn't see any truck. No campsite either." The smile on his face faded. Not dramatically, just slightly. Then he looked at me with this flat, unreadable expression and said, in a strangely calm voice, "Huh, that is weird." Then came a few seconds of silence that felt way too long. We just looked at each other across the fire. And then he asked me, "What else did you see out there?" The way he said it made my stomach drop. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't casual conversation. It sounded like there was something else out there, and he needed to know whether I had seen it. I forced out a nervous laugh and said, "Nothing. It was pretty hazy. I didn't see anything else." He held eye contact for several long seconds. Then he smiled again. "Well," he said, standing up, "if you want, I can show you my campsite. It's really just right over there." He motioned for me to follow him into the darkness. I immediately said no. He told me he could tell I was uncomfortable and that seeing his campsite would make me feel better, prove he wasn't lying. I said no again. That seemed to bother him. He tried not to show it, but I could feel the shift in him, like something in the conversation had gone wrong. After a moment, he gave a small nod, turned, and walked back into the dark. The second he disappeared, I moved. I threw everything into the camper without folding it, packing it, or organizing anything. Chairs, gear, table. I just shoved it all inside, slammed the door, got in the truck, and started driving out. As I turned the truck around, my headlights swept across the campsite one last time, and for a brief second, they lit him up. He was still there, standing just beyond the edge of the site, completely still, like he had been watching me the entire time. And in his hand, he was holding something. I don't know what it was. I didn't want to know. The headlights moved, and I drove. I didn't stop until I was far, far away from that place. To this day, I have no idea who he really was or what he was doing out there. And honestly, I'm okay not knowing, because whatever the truth was, I'm pretty sure I got out just before something terrible happened.